2018 California State Rail Plan. We have a staff report, the 2018 California State Rail Plan fact sheet, and the executive summary. Mr. Undera, you're going to introduce this item?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this item is to introduce a new draft 2018 California State Rail Plan. And just for your interest, if you want to see the entire document, which runs about 250 pages, the link in the staff report is live if you go online. We have included the executive summary and a short fact sheet attached to the staff report. This strategic plan provides a framework to plan and implement California's rail network for the next 20 years and beyond. The plan provides operating and capital investment strategies leading to a coordinated statewide travel system. There's some notable differences about this plan compared to prior state rail plans, and I'd just like to quickly go over highlight those. First, this plan takes a very integrated approach to rail service statewide, and it's being developed on a hub system similar to what the airlines do to plan their schedules. You'll hear more about that in the presentation. Second, the plan is consistent with state goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's very important. We have some pretty intense goals to meet over the next 10 to 20 years, and this plan helps us get there. Third, the passage of Senate Bill 1 provides new funding for rail investment that we have not had any time in the recent past. The funding programs include state rail assistance, transit and intercity rail capital program, the congested corridor program, and state transit assistance. And fourth, the plan is bold. By 2040, the plan projects that trips by rail will grow from a current 110,000 trips a day to approximately 1.3 million daily trips in 2040. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Kyle Gradinger. He's the acting chief of the CalTrans Division of Rail and Mass Transportation. At CalTrans, Kyle has guided the development of this state rail plan, as well as the California Strategic Transit Plan and the California Intercity Bus Study. His work focuses on coordinating and integrating the existing and proposed rail and transit services across the state into a seamless, integrated system. Prior to joining CalTrans, he led the rail planning team with the Federal Railroad Administration in Washington, D.C., working at all scales from very small projects to mega-regional rail studies. Kyle has a background in urban planning and transportation planning and has served as the president of the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia. And he notes that he purchased his first car at the age of 38 and hopes to develop a seamless multimodal transportation system in California so that he can get rid of that car. So, Kyle, the floor is yours. He's got a PowerPoint presentation for you.
Thank you, Chairman Friend and fellow commissioners. I appreciate the opportunity to come down to Santa Cruz and present the rail plan to you today. As George mentioned, I'm new to the West Coast, never been to Santa Cruz, but I welcome the opportunity and look forward to spending time here today and this weekend. So I wanted to give you an overview of the 2018 Draft California State Rail Plan, which was released about 2 weeks ago, I believe, and is in the middle of a 60-day public comment period. A quick overview of the Division of Rail and Mass Transportation within CalTrans. We are responsible for both mass transit and intercity rail, passenger rail programs in the state. On the mass transit side, we coordinate federal transit grants and procurement of buses for rural and small agencies. We guide the development and administration of state transit programs and cap and trade funding programs like the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program and the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program. On the passenger rail side, we are responsible for passenger rail planning and support. Our role has been evolving with the creation of the Joint Powers Authorities for the San Joaquin and the Lausanne or Surfliner corridors over the last few years, but we're continuing to have a role to shift now from a corridor focus, looking at day-to-day improvements and looking at the strategic long-term vision for a system in California. We're also working to develop capital projects to improve those passenger rail services and partnering with the host freight railroads. And we work on the procurement of passenger rail equipment, which is an incredibly daunting task in this country in this day and age. The industry dies 40 or so years ago on the passenger rail side, and we're finding that every time somebody needs new rail cars in this country, we need to recreate the industry for a few years, and so getting through that task is daunting, but we have the opportunity in California through federal stimulus funds and now with SB1 to procure new and modern rail equipment for the state of California. So the state rail plan is one of many plans that form that are sort of under the umbrella of the California Transportation Plan, CTP 2040, along with the state bicycle and pedestrian plan, freight mobility plan. The state rail plan is also, a federal requirement, which is that in order to be eligible for federal rail funds, you must have an approved or accepted state rail plan. There's also an additional California state requirement that requires the state rail plan have a 5 and 10-year program of projects, and the document itself is approved by the California State Transportation Agency, and we've been working closely with staff there as we develop the state rail plan. So just a quick overview of the building blocks of a network. So in California, many of you may be familiar with the existing services that we have today, which are illustrated by the map on the left, the intercity passenger rail routes, the San Joaquin, the Capitol Corridor, and Surfliner, as well as the commuter services in San Francisco and LA and San Diego, which are augmented by the intercity bus services, which can help Californians get to destinations as far as Eureka or as fun as Yosemite, and destinations where the rail currently does not serve. We also included in this rail plan the goals of the high-speed rail system and the projects that will be brought to fruition eventually by high-speed rail. Again, this is the overview of the requirements for the state rail plan, the federal and the state requirements. We followed several themes in developing the passenger rail state rail plan, but one of the things that we did differently than my former role at the FRA was to develop the guidance for state rail plans. What we did differently in California after seeing 49 other state rail plans is we focused on the idea of developing a true network of rail in California. So the first effort was what we called a network integration strategic service plan. We really got into the nuts and bolts of what is the travel demand in California today and in the future, and how do we create a service that can actually fulfill that demand and perhaps facilitate a shift from single occupant vehicles into a rail and bus system that coordinates with local first and last mile options, walking, biking, and TNCs as well. We spent the first year or so of the plan, it's taken about 3 years to develop. We spent the first year or so developing these principles of a rail plan that meets customer expectations, really thinking about the system from the perspective of the user, not the infrastructure builder. We looked at the idea, and we adopted the idea of synchronized timetables, creating a system statewide, which I'll describe in more depth, where buses and trains, local transit are all coordinated so that when you get to a station on the line and need to transfer, the bus you want to get onto didn't just leave 2 minutes ago. It's waiting for you, ready to carry you to your final destination. And that's all part of an integrated mobility solution, which includes integrated schedules, but also integrated travel planning and ticketing. The idea of strategic planning, I'll get into in a minute. It's setting our long-term goal for where we want to go and building to it rather than building the projects that are ready to go now, regardless of how they fit into that strategic vision. And consensus vision. This is, as I said, it's been a 3-year project, and the first year or so was basically spent working with other rail and transit operators, counties, communities, nonprofits, and other interested parties, and really developing a vision for, at least on the passenger rail side, what the state rail plan would entail. The rail plan vision is that California will have a premier, customer-focused, integrated rail system that successfully moves people and products while enhancing economic growth and quality of life. So we have many goals for the network, and the first is to connect California's communities. In this rail plan, as George mentioned, it is different, it is more bold than previous California rail plans and other state rail plans. We really intend to expand the rail system and extend access across the state, from the mountains to the ocean, everywhere in between. We want to be able to provide an integrated service based on a spine of rail service. We also want to develop emerging regional rail networks, and that is something that is going to come into play here in the Monterey Bay area. As we know about high-speed rail in the spine, we know about the existing corridors, but we see tremendous opportunity for rail to play a role in moving people through areas such as the Monterey Bay, Santa Cruz to Monterey and Salinas and up to Gilroy, and providing congestion relief and environmental benefits. We really seek to provide the opportunity to create a mode share shift by increasing the rail share of the travel market in California. Again, we're not trying to compete against highways. We're trying to provide an alternative, one that is better for the environment and that is congestion-free. We're going to be leveraging freight rail capacity enhancements. We're working more closely with Union Pacific and BNSF Railway. We're developing relationships with them through this planning process to gain access to their infrastructure and to work more closely with them. And we also looked globally at examples of best practices and found there are many opportunities to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of how we deliver rail in this country, and we want to do that in California. We want to make sure that we do more intensive utilization of the rail capacity that is out there. You look at the tracks, especially in this region, and you see a track and you hardly ever see a train, and say, well, there must be capacity there. Well, that's not always the case, but generally it is. So we're looking at opportunities to, once you build it, use it more. It's sort of the Southwest Airlines approach to service. A plane on the ground is not making money. A track lying there without a train on it is not providing revenue or carrying passengers. We want to develop a new approach to infrastructure development that saves costs by developing, on the passenger side, schedules that are designed years, decades ahead. We can perfectly suit the infrastructure that is built to match the service that is going to be provided. We know where we need double track for capacity or where we could get away with a single track, where we need to build hub stations where people can transfer rather than just every project being developed with its own set of goals. We're creating an overarching system goal and can fine-tune the infrastructure investment to the places where it's needed. And as I mentioned earlier, higher frequencies providing more service. In that early step of the planning process, the Network Integration Strategic Service Plan, we looked at passenger flows in the state and tied them with passenger travel demand modeling. And what you see on the left in this image is an array of the 58 counties of the state from generally north to south. And so you see the busy section in the middle, which is the Bay Area. You see the effect of San Francisco to Santa Clara on the CalTrain. And then you see Southern California with Metrolink and the Surfliner services. And you see one band of about 500 passengers a day making the current connection between the north and the south with the San Joaquin train connecting to the bus into LA. So we saw that there was going to be moderate ridership increase if we continued to build the system that we know today and as population and demand grow. If we didn't provide much more service, we'd grow to about 500 trips a day across the state, up and down the state, but continue to carry only in the realm of 130,000 or so passengers on intercity and commuter rail. The network that we conceived and the services that we conceived tying in with high-speed rail, higher frequencies, and expanded service indicated a tremendous increase, a tremendous latent demand for passenger rail service in the state. And so if the vision of 2040 in the state rail plan is achieved, the passenger flows go from today's 130,000 or so to over 1.3 million trips on passenger and commuter rail in California by 2040. I'll pass through here some of these. One of the things that we try to do in the rail plan is to achieve, not every market needs to be an air competitive market. San Francisco to LA does. The business plan for the high-speed rail program mandates that. But there are other markets where providing an alternative to automobile travel, either in free-flow conditions or congested periods, is really a more adequate goal or most suitable goal for the rail system. So this is the rail plan vision. It doesn't actually show a whole lot more coverage than what the current map today will show you. There are a few more destinations and a slightly denser network of routes. But what isn't shown in this map is the increase in frequency and the coordinated schedules so that a passenger can get to a station, walk across the platform, and 3 minutes later depart on the train to their final destination, providing the ability to travel from A to B or A to Z in California every hour throughout the day on a coordinated service. So at the statewide level, we're looking at an integrated statewide network coordinating high-speed rail with intercity and commuter or regional services. We're also proposing an integrated express bus system so that the bus system that we know today can be expanded into congested metropolitan areas, HOV lane buses and buses with travel time reliability in the Los Angeles area, the San Francisco area, and other congested corridors so that they can provide passengers, bring them to that transfer station at the scheduled time reliably. At those multimodal connection points, we're going to have that regular pulsed service throughout the day, every hour. Say you will know that your train will depart that station every hour at 3 minutes after the hour and 33 minutes after the hour, every half an hour or every hour. Repeating schedules that are easy for the passenger to remember and that allow us to have that connectivity such as the airlines do with their hub system. And then mass transit connections would tie into those stations as well. Just a zoom into the Northern California vision map. This again is the vision for 2040. I'm sorry, it doesn't show very well for the audience out here, but the teal line is the high-speed rail services operating at over 125 miles per hour. The blue lines are other rail services under 125 miles per hour. So this is not a plan about high-speed rail across California. It's a plan about connected, reliable rail across California. And the orange lines are bus connections where rail perhaps is just not feasible. And one thing you'll see in here is around the Monterey Bay area, we have conceived an idea of an integrated connection, sort of an X-shaped system linking the Monterey Bay communities to Gilroy at the high-speed rail station, so that we can have access from Santa Cruz, Monterey, Salinas to Los Angeles via connection point at Gilroy. You can have a 3-hour journey time from Salinas to Los Angeles connecting to a train at Gilroy. But I think even more importantly, if this system were to provide half-hourly or so service between all of the communities in the Monterey Bay area, you would be able to provide a local solution to traffic problems and a statewide solution to accessibility and open your markets. So it really, I think, kills two birds with one stone. Southern California, we've developed a similar network as well. The idea of scheduling it revolves around a concept. Again, the airlines have been doing this for a long time, but the country that has perfected this is Switzerland and the Netherlands as well. They've been running railroads with a pulse hub connected system for decades now, and the ridership boosts that they have seen after they have implemented these systems has been tremendous. Just basically the ability to know that you don't have to travel 220 miles an hour on a train. Having a frequent connection that makes connections to other trains is really the ideal solution to move people around on a rail and bus system. So here is what we call a string line chart. It's sort of a time and distance graph that railroad planners use. And so each one of those diagonal lines is a train leaving a location, and it's in minutes through the hour. And so you see the train progressing along its course from station A to station B. But where we plan the schedules ahead and we know where the trains are going to meet, that's where we know we need to have things like a double track section. That's how we can limit our investment instead of just trying to get out there and pour as much concrete and lay as many track ties as possible and build a double track corridor over 100 miles because we don't know where the trains will meet. If we plan ahead accordingly, we can actually identify those locations where the double track passing section needs to be, and thereby significantly reduce our investment in the passenger rail system. And it's possible. It used to be done by hand, but today with computers, we can model these scenarios statewide in a matter of weeks to set it up and minutes to run new versions of that model. So we're going to be using that power as we continue to advance and develop the network design of the system. Again, I mentioned Switzerland as an example that we've borrowed heavily from. And I wanted to talk about one location. It's a rural community about an hour southeast of Zurich, Switzerland, called Wetzikon. It's a small town of about 5,000 or 10,000 residents. It is served by 3 commuter rail lines in the Zurich Suburban Railway Network. It also has 12 bus lines that come into this station, and because of this pulse hub, what happens is every 15 and 45 minutes after the hour, the station becomes a center of activity. Between those time periods, it's pretty quiet, but what you see is this connection of people between bus and rail that brings someone from a small village of maybe 100 or 200 residents with a bus stop in front of the post office, brings them to Wetzikon at 15 minutes before the hour, where they can transfer to 3 different regional rail lines and get into Zurich in 45 minutes or so. It's travel competitive with an automobile, but it happens throughout the day. So you are never stranded. You always know that between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. you can have a trip every 30 minutes with travel time, reliability, and comfort connecting bus to rail. Here you see the example in the regional rail network where this location is. And the concept of how this works, on the left what you see is a net graph. This is one of the planning tools we use now. The gray bars are the station locations, and the smaller lines with the numbers like 41, 19, 11, 49. The numbers nearest the gray block is the minute that a train arrives every hour, and the number farther away on that line is the minute it departs. So you see in the example in the lower left, a train arrives on one line at 41 minutes after the hour and departs at 19 minutes after the hour on that line. But what's most important is you see they all kind of congeal around those time periods: 11 minutes after the hour, 15 minutes after the hour, 41 minutes after the hour, 45 minutes after the hour. And essentially, these vehicles all arrive in a choreographed fashion, meet in the station, share their passengers, and then depart throughout the day. And this is an example. I'm sorry, if one of you could press the play button on this video, just a quick visual example of how this works day in and day out, twice an hour, in a small suburban edge community in Zurich, Switzerland. So we have, just before the 15-minute mark, the buses begin to arrive from these small communities and load their passengers onto the train platform, and then wait for 4 or 5 minutes. Sorry, this takes about 2 minutes to run through. The trains begin arriving, and the networks that these trains are arriving on are all single-track networks. They come into a station where there are 5 platform faces, but the network itself surrounding the station is all single track. So it doesn't need to be a massive investment in infrastructure. It doesn't need to be a massive use of right-of-way. With the intelligent scheduling, you can put that infrastructure where it's needed, you can buy the land where it's needed, and you can minimize your impact on the landscape and the right-of-way away from the station. So here the trains have arrived. Now the passengers are transferring either between trains or between trains and the buses. Perhaps someone's going to meet somebody for coffee and cake and catch the next train in a half an hour, knowing that that schedule's always there. That train will always be there the next half an hour. And it probably doesn't hurt that all the buses are Mercedes-Benz. No offense to local bus manufacturer Gillig, but that certainly draws people into transit. So then finally the express train leaves first, and then the local all-stop commuter trains begin to leave after that. And all this is happening in about 6 or 7 minutes. Apologies for the slow video. I'm trying to do play-by-play, but I'm not very good at it. And then finally, these 60-foot articulated buses with 100 passengers in the small town depart every half an hour in a parade with signal preemption. So that's the example of how it works every day, every 30 minutes in Wetzikon, Switzerland, and at 1,000 other locations in a rural country of 6 million people. So if we took that example, the net graph showing the frequencies essentially, so each line shows you a train per hour. So in this map you see between San Jose and San Francisco in 2040, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trains per hour on the CalTrain corridor, a mix of high-speed rail and CalTrain services. But you look down at the idea here, this is the 2040 vision, it's the framework we want to build from. You have trains arriving at the Gilroy station in that coordinated fashion a few minutes before high-speed rail trains to LA and San Francisco arrive and departing a few minutes after, providing services then through Watsonville and Castroville that could then overlap again with services to Santa Cruz and Monterey while the main train continues on to Salinas. This is just one conception of how this network could work, but the idea is that we create this reliable travel networks every 30 minutes throughout the day, or hourly to start, but depending on demand, perhaps we could multiply that frequency into half-hourly during the morning peak periods so that you can help alleviate the local traffic congestion into Santa Cruz, into Monterey, and other places. On the freight side, there's some impact on this region of the state, but what we are looking at in terms of opportunities are opportunities to improve entire trade corridors, not just single specific projects for freight railroads, but to improve fluidity, getting out of ports, getting goods out of California and off to their farther markets. We want to look closely at opportunities to work with regional short-line railroads to improve economic development and get trucks off the road, and that which could be something, bringing back the reefer express trains in a region like this with short-line partners who are interested in that market. Looking at grade crossing improvements throughout the state, investments in terminal and yard capacity so that freight trains aren't getting blocked and sitting and polluting, that they're moving as quickly as possible in and out of their terminals and getting their goods out to market. And I mentioned earlier the strategic investment plan. So this is the way we're looking at the 2040 vision. What you see is the base year on the left and the 2040 vision on the right with the grandiose idea of connected networks across the state. For the 2022, the 5-year investment program in the state rail plan, what we're looking at is planned and programmed projects that exist today or that are fairly developed today, being implemented by 2022. Beyond that date, though, we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the 2040 vision and working back to develop the projects for the 10-year time frame so that we're not putting money into, for lack of a better term, throwaway projects today. We're putting money into projects today that are going to continue to enable that vision that we have created statewide by 2040. I'll keep moving through here. So in terms of the short-term plan in 2022, we're looking at those planned and committed projects. We want to improve service implementation planning, so we want to make sure we start working with the joint powers authorities and the commuter rail operators to begin to identify the opportunities to connect their services and their schedules and to find ways to coordinate their planning in the near term. The state is beginning efforts to look at integrated ticketing, revenue collection, and trip planning. It's 2017, it's almost 2018, and the fact that we don't have an app on our phones that can work for all services across California, it's kind of shocking, actually. And so the state is working with researchers and hopefully we're reaching out to Silicon Valley and operators to begin to develop the idea of a statewide travel planning app where you can get information about every large and small provider, maybe even TNCs and bike share systems across the state, and plan that trip and book one ticket for that entire trip. We're going to get to work on what a scope of work for that might look like in the 5-year time frame. By the 2027 midterm, based on the funding that is reasonably expected through cap and trade and SB1, we plan to expand the network to use all the existing capacity that we have, all the agreements we have with Union Pacific and other host railroads. We want to have that fully utilized. For example, the Capital Corridor has 15 trains a day between Sacramento and the Bay Area. They have rights to 20. We want to get to that point by 2027. High-speed rail will be implemented valley to valley, and we hope to then, by 2027, have many of these connectivity improvements, these station-focused improvements that allow the passengers to walk 10 feet from the train to the bus. That's the kind of capital investment we want to start having in place by 2027, and we want to have that integrated ticketing and trip planning app fully developed by the beginning of high-speed rail operations, and the early train operator agreement requires high-speed rail to use a system that the state asks them to. And if we can develop that coordinated program by then, we can require that the high-speed rail system is tied into that statewide ticketing system. And then for the long-term vision, we see high-speed rail phase 1. The long-term vision is for 2040. High-speed rail phase 1 is still scheduled for 2029. And we want to make the other investments for the rest of the service goals that I've portrayed to you today by 2040. And we expect to see these regional networks both in the Monterey Bay area, also in the Central Valley, around the Kings Tulare station, providing access to communities like Lemoore and areas that are off the high-speed rail spine. We expect 2 or 3 of these regional rail networks to be implemented in that time frame between the 10-year program and the 2040 vision. The freight system I'll pass through here, but as I mentioned, we're beginning to work closely with the host railroads, more closely than I think we ever have before. A quick overview of the historical funding in the state. We have many sources that I'm sure you're all very aware of. The State Public Transportation Account, the STIP, and the Interregional Transportation Improvement Program portion of the STIP, the ITIP, is one where we have now presented. Generally, rail is required to receive a minimum of 9% of the STIP, a portion of the ITIP. This year, we have worked with the CTC to put in for almost 25% of the STIP to be given to rail projects to begin to advance projects in the state rail plan, and we've received favorable comments at CTC hearings in the north and the south on those programs. Some of those projects will also help to improve service through this area, extending rail service to Salinas and eventually more frequent service to San Luis Obispo. And then we have the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program through SB1, which gives us before SB1 gave us 10% of cap and trade auction proceeds, and so that's been a fairly significant and helpful funding source for rail and transit capital projects. High-speed rail has its own funding, local measure funding, and then there continue to be occasionally federal grants and FTA formula funds, but thanks to SB1, we don't have to worry so much about what's coming down from Washington, D.C. anymore. In terms of SB1, what that does for the rail and transit side is it augments the state transit account, the state TIP program, and Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program. We have a TIRCP round that is coming up. The applications are due, I believe, on January 12th for Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program, which is going to help advance some of these early 2022 timeframe projects. The applications are due on January 12th for the first, I believe, 5-year program of that funding. So we're looking at over $1 billion that the California State Transportation Agency will put into the TIRCP program with announcements in April of next year. We're working with our partners at CalTrans and Regions to find opportunities to invest in rail and transit and multimodal connections through the Congested Corridors program, which specifically calls out not only the highway corridor, but the parallel rail and commuter rail corridors as eligible applicants, eligible areas where applications should be made. And we're looking at the Trade Corridor Enhancement Account and trying to find opportunities to move freight, provide more freight fluidity and grade crossing improvements there. So some of the near-term tools that are supporting our state rail plan vision through the State Transportation Agency and through the state legislature, we have seen a renewed focus on a new priority on transit rail integration, not just building projects, but integrating it and making it a more useful system. The state is in the near term going to focus cap and trade funding on transit and rail. And the State Transportation Agency is very interested in guiding that future interregional project selection. So the TIRCP program is one that state agency is very interested in supporting rail and transit projects. We want to continue to improve existing services, improving in network planning and operations, getting those schedules working together better, improving the customer experience, which really, in my opinion, should be sort of the top priority. The money, we hope, is there. We will work to prevent that money from disappearing next year, but really it's improving that customer experience. It's mobile ticketing, ticket integration, better passenger information, better service. Those are the things we can start working on today. And then finally, this new approach to the state rail plan is this long-range planning with keeping the vision in mind, so that we have a series of projects that are built not to preclude the future vision and not to be wasted in the near term. So we've just released this draft state rail plan. We'll be programming the 5-year TIRCP cycle. Applications due January 12th. And we have begun with CalTrans and with some of our partners throughout the Northern California mega region, including TAMC. We have begun to get the planners together to begin to take a deeper dive looking into the Northern California regional rail network and how we can begin to implement a more integrated system from the technical perspective. And we'll start to bring in political and economic partners to that discussion as we go. And we'd love to have input and feedback from Santa Cruz County as we work on that sort of ad hoc group at this point in time. And we are working to develop research and planning for a conference late spring of next year to bring in global experts on integrated ticketing and trip planning to look at some of the obstacles and opportunities in that area. The rail plan, as I mentioned, was released on October 11th. The 60-day public comment period goes until December 11th. We have a few more public workshops remaining, mostly in the southern part of the state, but we will have a statewide webinar on December 6th. CTC will be giving us comments on December 7th, and then we hope to revise the document and obtain final approval from the State Transportation Agency and Federal Railroad Administration acceptance by probably spring of 2018 at this point in time. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I hope I didn't take too much of your time, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any brief questions from commissioners? Commissioner Leopold?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. It's interesting to see what the state is doing around rail. As you may know, we are in a process of study to figure out about how to use our rail line, or whether we're going to use our rail line. In what you laid out in terms of the priorities for the rail, the idea of a line that connects Santa Cruz, Monterey to the Gilroy station, how does that figure in it seems like that connects two counties to the high-speed rail system, but I haven't had a chance to read I only read the executive summary, so shame on me. But
me too.
I'm just trying to get a sense of how our system might look if there's a funding available.
That's a great question. I think what the system that I see evolving here in the Monterey Bay would look like is something that exists elsewhere in the world in many locations throughout Europe. I mentioned the Swiss example, but you look at French regional rail systems, German regional rail systems, Swedish ones as well. The idea of these frequent services providing connections, it's not easy to draw one route which will connect the four ends of an X.
Yeah.
So you have to think about interconnectivity. The idea of getting to high-speed rail is obviously important for travel across the state for residents of this region and for bringing tourism in. But I really do think that there is an opportunity to relieve traffic congestion and even not just greenhouse gas emissions, but climate change and sea level rise are something where it can help provide redundancy for Highway 1 through Elkhorn Slough and other areas where we have vulnerabilities. Having an additional travel option will be incredibly important at some point in time. I can admit that. But I think what it would look like is at the moment with the technology that exists today, we are considering things like diesel multiple units, which are a train product that was built in the U.S. 50 years ago, which was marginally successful, but other countries have continued to develop the technology and have looked at other propulsion, so battery technology and others, which can make it an incredibly clean technology. It's what SMART is running in Sonoma and Marin County, Oceanside Sprinter. We think there's a lot of potential there for a small, lightweight vehicle that can accelerate quickly, that doesn't need, it's just not a massive hulking train. Right. It's sort of light rail on the National Railway Network. And so we're going to continue to work with the industry and suppliers to look at what opportunities are out there to develop this equipment. But if you can have this operating essentially with a 1 or 2 person crew, you get very low operating costs. I didn't go into the components of operating costs that we're looking to drive down, but DMUs or multiple unit services are things you can take a train and attach multiple trains during peak hours, cut them off very quickly and easily during the midday, so you're not running too many empty seats. You can run it with lower operators, and I think that that's the kind of system where you can create a vehicle. You can put a vehicle into the system that is compatible with the surroundings and that is environmentally very friendly. Rail will continue to become more environmentally friendly. It's not taking full advantage of the steel wheel and steel rail advantages that are out there today because we're still dealing with hulking, diesel engines. I think that technology will continue to improve. But basically, it's a smaller, lighter, quick accelerating vehicle that is circulating throughout the Bay Area, providing connections to all ends, from Gilroy to Salinas to Monterey and Santa Cruz and everything in between, half hourly. That's where we'd like to go, and we'd like to continue to work with Santa Cruz County and Monterey County and your regional planning and transportation commissions to fine-tune what that may look like. And if we can get the costs down, it's something that could be done fairly quickly. Sonoma Marin took about 10 years to begin to implement their system, including the path system. They say they're a rail system and a path builder, and I think that there's certainly a fantastic opportunity there to look at. And in terms of combining rail and trail, that's something we've seen throughout the U.S. and of course throughout Europe. It can be done.
Yeah, I recently had the opportunity to ride the SMART train and hear about their system, and those DMU units are they're very nice units. They don't make a lot of noise. They move pretty quickly, and it's nice that their system there has the what do we call that? The quiet system. The
quiet zones.
Yeah, the quiet zones. So when they're going through the urban areas, there aren't allowed train whistles, and it's definitely a model that we will have to look at if we are going to seriously consider rail service here. I also appreciated your comments about coming up with a one transit ticketing device. One of the things that I heard when I was up at talking to the operators of the SMART system is that they have to go through 2 counties and 6 different transit systems, and they didn't have a unified way of doing it, and it was a big hurdle for them to get over. And for us to have one device that will work everywhere will make a big difference in terms of people getting out of their cars and using these alternative systems to move people around. So I appreciate the vision there. I'll look forward to reading the rest of the report. Thank you for your presentation.
Director Jones.
Thank you, Chair. So, welcome.
Thank you.
You're from Philadelphia?
I've spent a good deal of time there, yes.
So, were you here in 2008?
I was not.
Okay, so have you ever heard of the bullet train?
I sure have.
Okay, so in my file, I happen to have this. This is a headline from our local newspaper. It's called the Santa Cruz Sentinel. And in 2008, the voters here passed a bond with high hopes of a bullet train between the Bay Area and Southern California. And I won't read the whole thing because it's like 500 words, but the headline reads, "Bullet Train Blows by Latest Deadline. The bond measure that California voters approved in 2008 to build a bullet train contained plenty of safeguards to make sure the high-speed rail project didn't come a half-finished boondoggle and an ongoing burden to taxpayers. It was a good try." So if you read through that, and it's a compilation really of lawsuits of people who are in the higher echelon in terms of directors and management have just completely abandoned and either retired or been fired or what have you. So I don't want to be a pessimist, but I think it was Santa Ana said, if we don't learn by history, we're doomed to repeat it. How is your project and your, quote, vision different than what was kind of foisted on the taxpayers in 2008?
I think one thing that's different about how the rail plan today incorporates high-speed rail and combines it with regional rail systems, it's actually an allegory to a system that what happened in Switzerland. In 1981, they looked over the border at France, which had just started operating the TGV between Paris and Lyon, and saw a great success. And in Switzerland, the only place in the world which has more public referendums than California, basically went to the ballot and said, do we want a bullet train between Zurich and Geneva? And the voters overwhelmingly came back and said, no, we don't. We're a federalized country of many small communities. That train is only going to serve the bankers and the diplomats. It does not serve any purpose for us. They went back to the drawing board and came up with the idea of this integrated state national system, one ticket, transfers everywhere, that provided service to the dairy farmer and the student as well as the banker and the diplomat. They don't have any trains running over 125 miles an hour in Switzerland today, but the ridership has continued to go through the roof. California has, I think, the idea of the Northern California and the Southern California mega region being connected, I adamantly believe is a noble and worthwhile project. Should that not come to fruition, however, I think what we've put in this 2018 rail plan is a vision of seamless integrated connections that work very well within regions and between neighboring regions, so that if high-speed rail does not come to fruition or does not, for some reason, does not come to its full build-out, there will be an awful lot for localities and regions to gain from this state rail plan vision, with or without high-speed rail. But together, they will only be stronger.
So, one of the things that has really hampered public transportation is the use of lawsuits, and this was a big problem. Not only, and let's not just think of transportation, let's think of water projects. The latest, I think, water fix that was deemed, I think it was $18 billion project that was proposed by the governor, was kind of derailed by a couple of local agencies, and there were tons of lawsuits. What, and I don't know what kind of judicial system they have in Europe, but what can the state or what can we do to kind of minimize those kinds of problems?
I won't speak to the legal remedies, but I know that we, I think, have been very successful in CalTrans and the Rail and Mass Transportation Division over the course of developing this rail plan and revamping our outreach and our partnership with local and regional agencies. And I think that if we can really get out there and share this vision and work with our local partners, that if we can create support at the local level, maybe not unanimous support, but good support at the local level throughout the state, that we can help. That support will be critical when those lawsuits come, not if. When those lawsuits come, when those powerful individuals or entities decide to try to throw a stick in the spokes. Sorry, bad bike joke. But when that happens, I think that just having a good, broad, statewide support for what we think is a vision that we develop with our partners that moves people very well, I think that is the best defense for itself.
Yeah, just one last comment in that I think in our with Measure D and so forth, there's been a lot of outreach, particularly among the farmers, that we've gone forward. But there really hasn't been much consensus, and there has been pushback from, and I wouldn't consider these the ultimate power brokers in the region, but they are concerned about what happens to their land. And in an agricultural sort of state like California, I think farmers play a very big role in terms of who comes on their land, why they come on their land, is it in their best interest? But thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Rios.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Well, I'm an optimistic, and I'm also hopeful. And I also don't know if by 2040 I'm going to be here. I will be 90 then. But I am so really glad that we're speaking and we're seeing a vision of what the rest of the world is already doing. And if we are talking about global warming, if we're talking about the use of steel gasolines and all of the stuff that just pollutes, I think we have to start looking this way. And I'm very optimistic that it will happen, because eventually I think that people are beginning to see what is going on with traffic. Today, we're confronted here in our area these tremendous problems that we're going to be talking more about it, that just 15 miles can take you in the morning 2 hours and to come back another 2 hours, just 15 miles. And not to talk about the Bay Area, forget the Bay Area. You don't even want to go to the Bay Area. You used to think you can go on Sundays, but forget it. So I really believe that we have to start looking. I had the opportunity just to return from China, and I saw what they have over there. I was just amazed. I go, how can this country be so advanced on this kind of speed trains and fast trains? And I mean, I was just flooring. I said, why can we do it in the United States? And again, like they say, empires fall. And I don't know where we at now. And in this century, are we going to be the kind of a country that leads or behind? And I really believe that California can be that. So I really want to thank you. And I'm really happy that we are included here in the Monterey County and the Monterey Bay Area. And that, yes, Pájaro is right there. And that's been one of the first discussions. And I see our former RTC Debbie that used to be with us here, when we did take a train in Pájaro and brought it, I think it was the steam train or the Santan. The Santan. They came from Pájaro, to the boardwalk to show that it could be done. So I think that we have to be optimistic. And I really believe that we're going to be able to do it. So again, thank you very much. All these lawsuits, this is what this country is about. It's just lawsuit. Find an attorney. You can find them anywhere. They're ready to sue everything. So, but that has stopped us. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may add one more comment that relates to some of the many things I've heard today, the other optimistic country I look to when I want to be optimistic is the Netherlands. And one of the things they've done tremendously well, with this idea of a regular 15 or 30-minute service, is adding thinking about the first last mile, not thinking about Uber or flying cars, but thinking about tried and true technology, the bicycle. And I think that getting between the hearts of communities, rail is going to be the best option. But getting from the station to your final destination, we got to think about the problems and how we solve those there as well. And I look at the Netherlands, the statistics are amazing. There are 2 million rail passengers in the country of 20 million every single day. 40% of those passengers arrive at the station by bicycle, and another 15% depart and go to their final destination by bicycle, whether with their own bicycle, with their second bike, or with a bike share. I think that it needs to be, again, all-encompassing and multimodal. We need to think about the allied modes and how it all works together. But that gives me optimism as well, that we can solve these problems without having to think about futuristic technologies either. So.